So I'm 29 years old in the year 2023, which makes me a very young millennial, and yet I love old classic movies made before the 1970s. But why? What's going on, everyone? My name is Daniel. Welcome to the Cobwebs channel, where I love talking about classic movies, and today I just want to talk about why. Why is it that I am a very young person and I love watching these movies that were made way before I was actually born? And one thing I do want to say right off the bat is that this is not a video about why old movies are better than new movies, because I don't actually believe that. I think it comes down to taste. I think there are a lot of great movies made today. There are a lot of new movies that I'm personally a huge fan of. This is not a video about something versus something else. What's better? This is a video about why I personally gravitate to these movies, why I genuinely enjoy watching them so much, and why I do this YouTube channel to talk about them. So I've got 4 reasons why I love classic movies, and the first one is that I grew up on them. This tends to be one of the most common reasons for why somebody loves any kind of entertainment. And I do find that a lot of people, if they're going to get into classic movies, black and white movies, 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, they do have to get used to it. If you're just used to watching modern films, people have to get used to the acting style, the black and white photography, the lack of huge special effects, computer generated special effects. I just have never had that period where I had to get used to it, because the first kind of movies that I can remember being obsessed with were the Universal monsters and the Tim Burton Batman movies, but the Universal monsters probably primarily. I love the Universal monsters. I always have them primarily featured in my videos over my shoulder, just right over there. And I just remember being a little kid. I remember one Christmas, I got tons of Universal monsters on VHS tape. I wish I still had them. I loved those tapes, and several action figures of like Frankenstein and Dracula and such. And I remember on that Christmas day, me and my family, we watched Universal monsters movies on Christmas, and that's one of my most special Christmas memories. So because I've been watching Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi in those old black and white monster movies for ever since I can remember, that really set me up to be a fan of these kind of movies, and it set me up to never have that period of my life where I had to adjust to it. The next reason is probably the first thing that anybody's going to talk about when they talk about why they enjoy classic films, and that is the actors. I absolutely love the actors in old movies, particularly classic Hollywood movies. And again, it's not that I'm saying that these actors are so much better than actors today, because I think there are so many great actors today from all around the world, but there is something special, almost something mythic about these actors that worked back in around the 1940s and such. And I do think it comes down to one factor that I'm going to call talent versus charisma, or you might say charm. There is a lot of talent in actors working today, so much. But is there as much charisma? Are there as many actors with as much charm as a Cary Grant, as a Jimmy Stewart? Just the other night, I checked out the new 4K restoration of Casablanca, which is one of my favorite movies, and it looks incredible in 4K, by the way. But it really struck me about this movie that the greatest special effect in Casablanca is Humphrey Bogart. He is the reason that your eyes stay glued to the screen. There's so many great actors in this movie, but I do think Humphrey Bogart is the thing. And I think there's a reason that pretty much all of the most iconic lines from Casablanca are said by Humphrey Bogart.
He's looking at you, kid.
Movies today have so many elements to keep you invested in the movie. There is so much technology, there are so many effects, there's so many different kinds of action scenes, types of horror scenes that you can do. And back in these times, actors and the way that they delivered dialogue had to be the thing to keep you engaged for the majority of old classic movies. And there is just something special about that. And another benefit that this movie star system really gave movies back in this time is that the actors were the franchises. If you went to see the new Cary Grant movie, it's like Cary Grant is the franchise, to put it in movie terms today. If you go see a Cary Grant movie in the 1940s, it can be anything. It can be a dark psychological thriller like Notorious. It can be a romantic comedy masterpiece like The Philadelphia Story. It can be a submarine war movie like Destination Tokyo. And this system of the fact that the actor was the reason you go see the movie really allowed for a lot of variety in the kinds of movies that not only could be made, but could be successful and could be cultural landmarks. Today, the franchises are the characters. Spider-Man is probably the biggest movie star of today, and a Spider-Man movie can only be one thing. I love Spider-Man movies, but a Spider-Man movie can generally only be one thing, an action-adventure blockbuster. And I love Spider-Man movies, but they're generally going to be about similar themes, about the similar characters. You can definitely get some creativity in there, like with Into the Spider-Verse, but it's not the same as if the greatest movie star was a person, because then there's so much more variety, and that means that there's so many more movies that stand on their own. So this element of the actors being the franchises means there's a greater variety of kinds of movies, the kinds of movies that can be very successful, and the movies can stand on their own. My third reason for why I love classic movies so much is that these are classic stories. Now, what do I mean by that? Now, what I mean is that these are the basic structure stories that have formed what movies are today. Most of what you know about romantic comedies today comes from Frank Capra's It Happened One Night. Action adventure movies, so much comes from The Adventures of Robin Hood. If you like westerns, thrillers, crime movies, monster movies, it's these movies from this era, 1930s, 40s, 50s, that have formed the basis for what movies are now. Now, movies today have to do so much extra stuff in order to subvert tropes, subvert expectations. Filmmakers and storytellers today want to make things their own and have to just make a lot of twists to these basic stories. And there's certainly a value to that, and I respect that in many ways. But there is a certain purity to going back to this time and just watching the pure version of these stories. Now, when it comes to, for example, the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde story, today, Jekyll and Hyde has to be like the leader of some kind of monster hunting organization in a giant action blockbuster. Okay, but if you want to watch the pure version of that story, you gotta go back to 1931 and see the version with Frederick March, which is a masterpiece. Again, I can certainly respect how storytellers today want to subvert expectations, twist things, make things their own, but I do think there is a certain joy in seeing the pure, untouched, classic stories that you're going to get in movies from this era. My fourth reason is fairly obvious, and that's just preservation of history. I believe the preservation of film history is so important. Look, I don't really care what era I was born in. And what I mean by that is I don't want that to decide what media I am supposed to consume. I live in the greatest time that has ever existed for access to media. One, because there's more media than there's ever been before, by definition. It's kind of how time works. And then two is that access to this media has never been better. It has never been easier to see old movies than it is right now because of DVD, Blu-ray, especially these boutique Blu-ray companies like Kino Lorber, Warner Archive, Criterion, and streaming. I know a lot of us who love physical media, we don't want to talk about streaming and everything, but look, streaming has been revolutionary for access to movies and TV shows. It has never, ever been cheaper or easier to see movies from the 1930s and 40s than it has because of streaming. Now, look, obviously, if you go to Netflix, they're not going to have movies from the 30s and 40s, but there's so many services out there. HBO Max, Criterion Channel are great for seeing classic films. So you spend like $15 a month and you have access to so many of these movies. And I love that. I think it's important, and I want to take advantage of that. I do not want the fact that I live in the 2020s to decide that I can only watch movies from that general time. I want to see it all, and I want that access to the past. I want to see what life was like in these prior eras. Now, obviously, the Hays Code makes it slightly more difficult to see like the pure uncut version of what the past was like, but it's still pretty good. I want to see what was life like in the 1940s with the Great Depression, with World War II, and there are movies that give you a pretty good view of that. Back to Casablanca, this movie gave me a view, an emotional view into what life was like in a certain part of the world during World War II. I think that's so cool and it's so valuable. So that's what I have to say. These are the reasons that I love these classic movies, why I celebrate them, I seek them out, and why I talk to you about them on this YouTube channel. Another reason I want to talk about this is I've heard some takes of why people gravitate to these movies that I don't really agree with, that don't reflect my experience. Some people say things things like life was simpler back then and it was a nicer, more pleasant time, and that's when people were gentlemen and ladies. And I don't really think that's true. I mean, Great Depression, World War II, not a great time to live, and there was a lot of dark stuff going on. There's always dark stuff happening. So many of the problems we deal with today have been dealt with in the past, and movies will show you that. I mean, that's one reason I love film noir, right? I know there was a lot of darkness in the 1940s. I want to see it. Show me film noir. And in a lot of ways, film noir does, which I think is awesome. So thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this, would appreciate a thumbs up. It does tell the YouTube algorithm that my videos don't suck and they're worth checking out. And if you wanted more talk about classic films, hit the subscribe. I like doing top 10 lists about classic movies. I like doing Blu-ray reviews. I've particularly been covering a lot of Warner Archive recently. Great Blu-ray label that actually released Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So there you go. Let me know down in the comments, why do you watch these movies? These movies are so old. Why are you still choosing to watch them? Let me know in the comments down below. And thank you very much. I will see you next time.